My name is Mark Chockalingam, and in this presentation, I am going to give you a brief overview of sales and operations execution, specifically S&OE and how we implement with Kinaxis RapidResponse. And I am the president of Valtitude, which is a consulting firm based out of Boston, Massachusetts. We'll talk a little bit about the company in a minute. So sales and operations planning and sales and operations executions have become a key part of the supply chain practice and more recent implementations with companies. More recently, during the pandemic. The pandemic has caused a variety of disruptions in the supply chain and tested many forecasting paradigms and planning paradigms. So most of the companies are now challenged in terms of how to risk manage their forecasts and plans, particularly SKU level plans. And sales and operations execution has evolved as one of the best practices to manage both demand spikes and supply changes during the short-term execution window. The window is short. It's typically 13 weeks compared to the S&OP, which is a much longer process. So briefly, we'll talk about S&OE as a short-term model to execute and revise plans to holistically manage risk and incorporate new market information. So about the company, Valtitude, previously known as Demand Planning LLC, rebranded in 2019 as Valtitude, based in Boston, Massachusetts, founded in 2004. We've been in the business for about over 18 years, and we have operations worldwide. We specialize in strategy consulting, in demand forecasting, sales and operations planning, inventory optimization, supply replenishment planning, and overall supply chain end-to-end optimization. And we are better known for usability consulting to re-engineer SCM solutions, and we also provide implementation services across the board on a variety of tools. And Kinaxis is one of them. We have been a partner with Kinaxis over the last 3 years. So briefly, we can think about SEM, the practice in terms of strategy consulting. We help companies with the diagnostic and design and rollout of S&OP, IBP, and S&OE. And with our analytics arm based in India, we provide a variety of analytics and planning services, including outsourced planning services. And on the solution side, we implement SAP IBP, Kinaxis, and many AI/ML-based tools. So just to start with, there has been a lot of heated discussion in LinkedIn. I don't want to say heated, but quite a bit of vibrant, dynamic discussion talking about sales and operations execution and the master production schedule. In fact, some of the old school thought leaders think of S&OE as really the master production planning or master production scheduling, somewhat revisited, and there may be a lot of truth to it. So master production schedule, if you look at the overall chart, you have business planning, which is on the corporate side, and which is the integrated planning. And then we have S&OP, which builds the bridge between the business planning and the execution. And then you have, aggregate sales planning as well. Now, if you think about it, there has been a merger of sorts between the corporate business planning and S&OP. Now, with a new form of planning called integrated business planning, which really tries to merge the strategy planning, financial planning, and supply chain planning into one form. Regardless of any of these planning initiatives, the execution has to take place, and master production schedule is the single tool that really brings all this together and lays out the execution plan for the supply chain to produce, procure, plan, and execute and deliver the product to the customers. So that's the master production schedule right here. So master production schedule can be thought of as one integrated schedule that really draws from all the plants and lays out clearly what needs to be done by different supply chain functions, including the factory, the procurement, transportation, warehouse management, all of these functions together in one place. So Is S&OE just a new name for the old MPS? You could think so, but really, master production scheduling is the process of planning and assigning resources to meet the demand for the firm's product and services. And you could call it the mother of all plans. So really holds the key to the entire resource planning process. And that's the definition. And the MPS has been around for over 40, 50 years. It's a pretty old, I don't want to say old, classic. It has been around, it has thrived, and the MPS is vibrant, active even today. But in practice, I have seen in my consulting experience, MPS has been relegated into a document or an Excel sheet that arrives by email for different parties to do their part, often in a silo. So production planners do their own thing, plant schedulers do their own thing. They draw from the MPS, but they do their own thing. There is not enough communication. Warehouse operations do their own thing as well. Again, draw from the plan, but warehouse operations could also say, hey, we don't want to use the MPS. We're going to look at our historical data in terms of what our pick pack operation has been, how many trucks we have used in the past, and we're going to develop our own forecast to plan our operations, right? So MPS is there, but it's more a document rather than a planning process. So essentially what happens is you have the S&OP, sales and operations planning, which gives you an aggregate plan. You have the master production schedule, which kind of translates that into a detailed plan. But when it goes to execution, you have a challenge here because you don't really have a tactical process to execute the plan. So in fact, the execution could be fragmented. So then you have, when you have imbalances, disruptions in demand or supply, then you have a huge problem because it becomes chaotic. People come up with their own solutions, they don't communicate, they take individual decisions, and they don't come together until they see the result and they realize that there is challenges here, there are challenges here, and they are not able to proceed with this. So in practice, you have execution challenges because you don't really have a well-aligned tactical process to execute the master production schedule. So in fact, if you think about the S&OE, the S&OE is really the execution of the master production schedule. In fact, it actually aligns both the demand and supply sides together. So it resolves this chaotic, fragmented execution of the MPS, and with an aligned process that brings the functions together, the supply chain planners, the demand planners, the master production schedulers, and the rest of the supply chain function all together to execute the plan. Now, if this execution doesn't work well, if the MPS is not properly executed, then what happens is this may actually even affect the S&OP, because if you think about this chart, you have the strategic business planning, integrated business planning, then you have the S&OP, which is the sales and operations planning, kind of a volume planning, aggregate planning initiative that translates into mix and MPS. But if there are problems and fires and challenges in the execution process, then this may bubble up and the S&OP resources may be drawn to fight fires in the short term, which means you are losing valuable management time, which is otherwise needed for integrated business planning and strategic outlooks. So S&OE is just more than the MPS. Just to define S&OE, it's a tactical planning process to align and balance the demand and supply intersections. Cross-functional. In fact, it is a detailed planning process that draws different functions together, including sales, product management, demand planning, supply planning, production planning, detailed scheduling, warehousing and shipping, and customer service. It's weekly cycle. Now, the S&OP is a monthly cycle process. The S&OE is a weekly cycle process, focused on the next 13 weeks, reviewing both unconstrained and constrained demand plans, addresses demand-supply imbalances through constant interdisciplinary communication structured meetings. Now, that's the key. It essentially solves the siloed piece of MPS. It makes it a communication forum. And you have structured meetings that are scheduled on a weekly basis. So every week it repeats. You look at the next 13 weeks every week. And you look at both unconstrained and constrained plans, because that essentially is the MPS, and enables execution of the S&OP plan through demand control, supply changes, and holistic readjustment of plans to address exceptions. Now, we are not going to talk about a lot of details here because it's a very brief overview. Now, demand control is important. Reviewing supply changes and essentially looking at concurrent planning is important. This is where Kinaxis comes in. So you can look at supply changes to see what type of disruptions I have and what do I need to readjust. You can look at demand control to see, how do I react? How do I get information from my sales or marketing team if there is a demand spike? What is the nature of this demand spike? Now, demand sensing is also part of demand control, and that would be a key influencer of the S&OE process. So demand sensing has been implemented in a number of companies, and we don't want that to be kind of a siloed, separate process that is only handled by demand planning. Demand sensing is an integral part of S&OE. So S&OE is the bridge to S&OP. So what about the time frames? What are the different horizons? You have the 4 weeks. The next 4 weeks is as is. You cannot do much in the next 4 weeks. Next 13 weeks, you have some flexibility to change things. There is the realignment zone. So you can actually just maybe change somewhat in terms of supply. You can reshuffle a little bit of demand as well. And then you have the 4 to 18 months. This is where the S&OP comes in, which is essentially the planning process. So S&OE, the key to S&OE is really managing the first 4 weeks, the next 13 weeks. So S&OE has evolved to execute the MPS with a series of meetings that are aligned as part of the overall tactical process. So the intent is to bring all meetings under the execution umbrella rather than finding out later in the monthly S&OP meeting about what went wrong. Because now that is a postmortem, right? You are not able to make any changes. So S&OE brings the agility and makes you nimble in the process. So to summarize, S&OE key 3 things, there are 3 things that are key to put S&OE together. So one is the master production schedule, which we know exists. If you don't have a master production schedule, then I think you need to kind of look back and see what is happening, what is acting as a master production schedule in your company, because having an S&OP is not enough. S&OP has to be translated into a master production schedule so the individual supply chain functions can execute based on the overall master plan. So you need a master production schedule, which I assume by default exists in every company. Then you need to have a series of tactical meetings, right? So these tactical meetings are weekly meetings. Every week, you may have 3 to 4 meetings every week. And this repeats again the following week. So these may be very quick 1-hour meetings that really look at overall execution of the plan to evaluate imbalances, demand changes, supply disruptions, and tactical execution changes. So tactical execution changes, like for example, truck availability, machine breakdown, these are all things that you can take care in, these are all things that will have a 4-week horizon. Now, there are other things that can take place that could be between the 5th week and the 13th week. And essentially, the third ingredient is a live update of the schedule, the master production schedule, so that you don't really wait for the next plan to come in and trigger a new MPS, but you just make changes to the MPS based on some of the disruptions that you are aware of. And there is continuity, and there is a feedback process that goes back to S&OP saying, hey, these are the exceptions that we have made. So the planning horizons and focus, S&OE is the 13 to 16 weeks. Again, I did mention 13 weeks, but it's not really kind of, etched in stone. It could be 13 weeks, it could be 16 weeks, it could be 20 weeks, depending on your industry, depending on your business structure, depending on your culture. S&OP is the outer tongue, right? So, you have the history. S&OE is not history. S&OE looks at history on a continuing basis. It evaluates what is happening historically, but really focused on, the first 1 to 26 weeks, right? So the first 1 to 8 weeks is tactical. So demand fulfillment takes place. you look at and focus on detailed SKU customer level plans and orders and execution at the SKU customer level. Then you have the mid period and the long term period. The long term is 6 to 18 months. Undoubtedly, that is the S&OP. Essentially, you need this for aggregate planning at product family level, and it's critical for production capacity planning. So you could actually change capacities, you could make adjustments to a variety of things in the long term, 6 to 18 months. The midterm, 8 to 26 weeks, is essentially the flexible zone, the real sweet spot, where both S&OU and S&OP can come together. This is where the plan is being reset. You just look at S&OP and then say, hey, what do I need to do? What are the things that I need to do here in this? What kind of flexibility do I have? Can I change demand? Can I change supply? And this is as a reaction of what happened in the red zone, right? The red zone is something that happened. We cannot do much. We can make a few changes there, but really the midterm is where I'm going to look at what happened, things that I couldn't change in the first 1 to 8 weeks. How does it impact my flexible green zone between 8 and 26 weeks? So want to keep in mind that S&OE operates in the first 13 to 16 weeks or even 26 weeks. And S&OP operates from anywhere from 4 months to 13 weeks to the 18-month time period. Okay, so overall, in terms of where you would see S&OE and how does it sit? So you have S&OE, which aligns demand and supply at the tactical level, connect to the daily schedule. S&OP balancing demand and supply plans and align operations through a management decision process. Strategic plan is strategic corporate plan, including financial objectives and goals. So you really evaluate every quarter how you're meeting your financial plan, strategic plan, and are you on target or not, and what are the risks and opportunities to the budget. So you have a strategic plan, you have the S&OP, and you have the S&OE, which is the execution plan. And it layers down to the daily plans and schedules, because the S&OE, from the S&OE, you look at the, it to the daily schedule, the daily production schedule, warehouse schedule, in terms of shipping schedule, all of that stuff should be tightly connected and layered into the S&OE. Okay. So going back to the 13-week horizon, getting into a little bit of detail here, what happens in any, in these different time zones? What happens in week 1 in the S&OE process? Weeks 2 to 5, what do you do? Week 6 to 12, what do you do? Week 13, what do you do? And then obviously the handoff to S&OP, right? Essentially, S&OP hands off the 4 to 18 months so that the first 13-week execution plan can be laid out. So week 1 is the as-is fulfillment week. So flawless execution, order fulfillment. You look at metrics, unbiased metrics. You recalculate the metrics every week, end of the week. But most importantly, assess impact to the next 8 weeks, because this is where we can operate. Because you cannot just do much in week 1. So you meet today, you look at what's happening today, but you look at the orders, you look at the supply schedules, and then see imbalances and disruptions and decide on what you want to do in the next 16 weeks. So who is responsible for week 1? Customer service, supply planners, warehouse. So these are the guys that execute, and they bring the latest information to the table, and then they take back with them what minor changes that they need to do for the next 2 to 5 weeks. Next 2 to 5 weeks, the first 2 to 5 weeks, what you can do is you can make some adjustments to supply. So you evaluate supply shortages, unexpected changes to supply, warehouse issues, inventory availability issues, and potential machine downtime. These type of issues, you want to just look at it and then say, what do I want to reshuffle? How do I want to change some plans so that I can actually maximize, my customer service and minimize disruptions to, what I have promised, and also any type of inventory issues. So production schedulers, supply planners, warehouses responsible for weeks 2 to 5. Although all of them would be meeting, in different meetings during the week, but they would be responsible for looking weeks 2 to 5. Week 6 to 12 is the demand volatility. So there is some things that we could potentially do on the demand side as well. Unexpected changes to demand. market factors, demand sensing, and considering the demand disruptions or demand spikes, you can look at the demand and say, is this spike in demand because of a demand shift or organic demand? The demand shift is essentially what is happening, what kind of demand that needs to materialize next month probably happened this month. So which means you're going to be a little lighter on the demand next month because all it is customer shifting and wanting the product ahead of time, ahead of their forecast. If it is an organic demand growth, suddenly we realize that, Walmart has actually opened, or added distribution of your products in another 100 stores, and you learn about it for the first time, then you know that this is going to be organic. It's going to happen every week in the future. So here, sales is involved, demand planning is involved, even product management is involved. Sales is involved because you could potentially work with sales teams to vet this information about a shift in demand versus organic demand. And then even talking with the customers for a 360 to see if they can readjust the orders so that you can maximize your customer service overall, right? Because some customers could potentially wait because they have enough inventory in their stores and back rooms. So moving on to week 13 is resetting the production schedule. So essentially, this is the jump off point. This bridges the S&OP. You can flex the plans, firming the SKU level demand plan, and look at the MPS and provide demand and supply visibility, and you feed back to S&OP. So week 13 is essentially the connecting week that looks at the next 4 to 18 months. So the S&OP manager is involved, master planner is involved, demand planning is involved as well in looking at week 13 plan. So obviously the 4 to 18 months is the agenda for the S&OP, is the RAM for the S&OP meetings, unconstrained demand plan, rough cut capacity planning, capacity flexing, senior management is involved, and a lot of things could change in the time horizon that covers the 4 to 18 month plan. So all of the recent information that is uncovered in the planning process, in the execution process, in terms of late breaking information, both in terms of unexpected demand and supply disruptions, all of these are brought together as an impact for week 13 and passing that information back to S&OP, right? That happens, in the weekly plan, so that we know what is being passed to S&OP in the weekly execution. So going to Kinaxis, right? Looking at Kinaxis has helped us, quite a bit in terms of materializing, translating this vision of S&OE into reality, right? Because Kinaxis offers concurrent planning. So Kinaxis can help you do both S&OP and S&OE because, it allows us to, realize the dream of supply chain agility. With Kinaxis concurrent planning, it's a natural platform because you can evaluate, every scenario that happens. You can just look at a demand, a spike, or even a loss of demand, right? Because it's not demand spike in one way. Even if you have demand, but that doesn't materialize, suddenly there's a demand drop off, you need to evaluate that as well. Or any supply disruptions, any changes, machine downtime. All of these things can be evaluated in the form of scenario planning. So you could actually create a scenario in Kinaxis for these different types of new late breaking information and evaluate, see what happens, what does it impact, what are the bottlenecks, right? And when are the bottlenecks happening? Is it happening in the next 3 weeks, next 6 weeks, or in the outer time frame? And what would be your response? So Kinaxis allows you to evaluate this live in terms of these scenarios. So what we would do is, basically model these disruptions, come up with different alternatives, and then go to the S&OE meetings with different alternatives that you could pick from. And then you pick the most optimal alternative and then commit that scenario to become the plan. So, and then by default, what happens is on a monthly basis, that also becomes part of your plan for the S&OP to look at it and then see what long-term changes need to be done. So this way, Kinaxis kind of naturally, becomes a platform for implementing S&OE. So overall S&OE process flow, we don't have to belabor this. It's just really a summary in terms of what happens. You have long-term supply visibility that comes from S&OP, translates into MPS, the master production schedule. Then you have, you also look at launch of new products and packaging, and this is where product management comes in, because we did talk about product management as a key functional stakeholder in the S&OE process, but we didn't really go into much detail. So both sales and product management are functional stakeholders and are important players in the S&OE process, because you could launch new products, but you could also launch new packaging almost tactically, almost every week, every month, what have you. So these need to be evaluated in terms of going to market the new package. So there are tactical implications for new packaging, and so product management needs to be involved in terms of the readiness, availability, and go to market. Address supply volatility, and if you have supply issues, you're going to look at the supply volatility, and then you may have to make customer prioritization, right? um, and in terms of availability of new products as well, suddenly if your demand is high, then you may have to do some type of allocation and customer prioritization. And then address demand volatility. When you have unexpected demand changes, then you need to address those demand volatility through the S&OE process as well. Demand sensing gives you a forward look. So you could actually just kind of reevaluate, do a sense demand almost every week, and then come up with a sense demand for the month. So which could be used for additional scenario planning and evaluation. And in that case, you could do potentially shuffling customer fulfillment, right? Robbing Peter to pay Pal. But, in that case, it's okay, right? Because I think, one of the customers may be flush in inventory. So it's okay to draw that inventory and give it to the other customer. Obviously, you have to get alignment from sales teams. And decisions to expedite supply to address major demand spikes. In this case, some expediting has to be done. It could be overtime, it could be expediting raw materials. And finally, the S&OE would feed back up to MPS and S&OP, so that your midterm and long-term plans could be adjusted and go back to the long-term supply visibility that is again done through the S&OP in the form of a midterm and a long-term plan. So overall, that's the S&OE process flow, different steps that need to be taken in the S&OE, to cover the 13-week period. So in summary, S&OE is weekly cadence. Every week, it's a reset. You look at things every week for the next 13 weeks. Address all aspects of the execution over the next 13 weeks, and then finally report out the S&OP. So in summary, three things, right? One is you need to have a master production schedule. You need to have communication structured meetings, that are aligning all the functions and that provide communication and plug the silos that exist. When you have these tactical players working just directly off the master production schedule. And finally, report out to S&OP. It has to form the bridge to S&OP. So I would recommend that, planning these meetings, coming up with a weekly cadence, having structured meetings, and enabling communication through this forum is key to the success of S&OE. And a successful S&OE is a key to a successful S&OP as well, sales and operations planning. So, that really is a brief overview of the S&OE process, sales and operations execution. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can look at our website, www.valuationplanning.com, or you could contact us through the phone as well. So have a good conference. We'll look forward to speaking with you.